Recording.
We are recording?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so you may have heard of a stalker, you may have heard of a stalker backgrounder, but I'm here to tell you that stalker backgrounders are the same thing. The purpose of a stalker is basically just to raise the calves up and prepare them for the feedlots. So you want them to gain weight in a timely manner, but you also don't want them to fatten up. You want them to grow, but on a leaner side. Stalkers have both steers and heifers. They are not specified to just one or the other. Stalker calves are usually going to be your grazers. They typically are grazing because it's a cheaper way to feed them. And like I said earlier, you don't want to put a lot of fat on them. You want them to gain quite a bit of weight in that amount of time that you have them, but you don't want to put fat on them. The reason you don't want to put fat on them is because that's the feedlot's job. And what we do is we prepare them for the feedlot. So here we're not going to talk about a breeding program. We're not going to talk about a finishing program or a cull program or anything. And the reason for that is simply because it's just not our job. Our job is to just raise them up, graze them, and have them ready to go to the feedlot when it's time. So we are DL Stalker Calves. We got that name from a really special place. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of a guy named Daniel Linden, but that's where we got that from. So like I said earlier, stalker calves are just preparing them for the feedlot on grass. It's extremely important that the pasture has a good quality feed for them. That way they can grow and have a good nutritious meal. Our farm, we have 220 calves from May to November. And in November, we'll sell those calves, and then we will buy 100 more from November to April just to hold us around for all year round. Typically, stalker calves are just during the summer months, but with our farm, we decided that we're going to do 100 during the winter months. That way, we have an operation running all year round. So here's our farm layout. As you can see, we have 4 different 100-lot acres, and the reason for that is we are going to be doing rotational grazing. They are going to be split up into 2 pastures, so either the 2 pastures on the left-hand side, 2 pastures at the top, whatever, they'll be split into those. And after 3 weeks, we're going to rotate them down so you can let those pastures that they were already in grow up. That way, they constantly have a good nutritious grass, because like I said, that's the most important thing with grazing stalker calves. In the top left corner, you see that we have 50 acres of hay. That is so that we can add in some hay in the fall months when the grass may be covered by snow. In the center there is a 40 by 60 pavilion. That's just a covered area for the cattle to get out of the weather. And in the center of that pavilion there is a 250-gallon spring-fed waterer. Like I said, that's so that they have access from all the pastures, but then they can't get to the other pastures from that area. There's gates closed that you can open and close. Excuse me. The pastures are going to be split up by wooden fence. And then in the bottom right-hand corner, there's going to be a building there for sick pens, a chute, and different things for us to work with the cattle, so on and so forth when they come in. So when they arrive, we have a few different things that we'd like to do. We want to do, first off, a health check, make sure that they are all healthy and ready to go. If they're sick, we're going to hold them back. That way they don't get the rest of the herd sick, because if they get sick, it's going to slow them down and they're not going to be able to finish on time like we need them to. We're going to certainly vaccinate them, just like I had said, so that they don't get sick and hold themselves back. And if we see any bull calves that need cut, we're going to let them graze for a week, and then we'll bring them back in and cut them. The reason for this is because you don't want to do more than, typically, as they say, more than 3 things at a time. And the reason for that is if you stress them out too much, it's going to weaken their immune system and bring them down, and they're not going to be able to keep themselves healthy, going, eating, growing, and all of that. So we want to let them calm down for a week, get used to the pastures, and then we will cut them if needed. So some of the vaccinations, the bovine Big 4, bovine respiratory, the parainfluenza 3, bovine viral diarrhea, and infectious bovine rhinotracheitis. Those are just really big viral diseases that these cattle can get. They spread extremely quickly. They are super, super, super contagious, and they will slow the cows down a lot if they get really sick and possibly even lose them. And of course, at this point in time, what you want to do is not lose them. Dead cows make no money, so we want to keep them as healthy as possible. Another one is pink eye. Pink eye is really common, especially in white-faced cattle, as you can see here. So we want to vaccinate for anything that we can. That way we can keep them going and growing. That way we can make our money in the end.
So our farm is going to be based in Licking County, and Licking County is in the central part of Ohio. It is 687 square miles, and it is prominently a rural county with less than 2% being urban areas. And the population of this county is 46,000 people. Looking at the pricing of land in Licking County, a nearly 1,000 acre farmland was recently sold and listed for $2 million. And the normal size of the farm sold are 83 acres, and even the homes range from 229,000 in this area. Then looking at the topography of Licking County, most of the farm products sold are transported by trucks within this county. There are small belts of land that are significantly steep and hilly, and the hills are considered round or elliptical in this county, and they break abruptly to steep slopes, which require us to pay attention to where our fields are located so the animals are not walking too close to steep slopes and injuring themselves. Some places have valleys that are bordered by small belts of steep buffers. The western part of the county contains a till plain. There are steep valleys that are shallow and generally lying only a few feet below the level of the floodplains. The western parts of the county have a poor drainage, and the drainage in these parts are not well established, making it harder for, if there is a heavy rain, for the water to drain away from the crops. The runoff is only carried by a few streams that only have a few side streams, and those side streams only normally typically go back a short distance from the main valleys. The central part of Licking County has a broad in-stream area, which has no development of natural drainage way, making it harder for those areas to be drained as well. Stream bottoms in this area will range from narrow trenches along minor branches that can be as wide as 2 miles in width and along the larger streams. The widest bottom in this county is the Licking River. Looking at the climate that is presented in Licking County would be the fairly cold winters, mild summers. This is now becoming a little harder to anticipate what we are having with our climate changing rapidly over the last few years. The principal climates that influence the crop growth are precipitation, temperature, and sunshine, and that's what you see all across Ohio. Hay and grain may continue to grow before and after the first date of frost and the last killing frost because of the unpredictability of the weather. Poor drainage sometimes delay the rapid growth of corn after planting. Looking at our last and first frost dates, the average for last frost date for Licking County is April 30th, and about the first killing frost is going to be around October 11th, giving us a frost-free season of 164 days. and that is a good time frame for us to get our crops in the field and get them grown and harvested in time. When it comes to the agriculture in Licking County, it consists of general farming practices that we see all across Ohio and other countries across this country. There are typically grown corn, hay, small grains. Sometimes we see potatoes, and livestock that we see that are produced in this county are cattle, sheep, and hogs. The eastern side produces a lot of hay and raises sheep because of the topography of the county. It is easier to raise sheep on those land than any of the other livestock. Hay crops normally consist of timothy and clover because those grow great with the climate that we have in this county, and a lot of farmers have selected to grow the timothy and clover together to have a greater yield and better quality of their hay. Corn is grown extensively in this county. Small grains are sometimes cut green for hay. The eastern parts of the county are covered with broom sedge weed, which offers poor pasturage and hay, so those fields are normally reseeded with other seeds that we can use to provide a better quality hay for our cattle and other livestock. Sweet clover has been proven to be grown in small acreages. They have not really done a lot of the sweet clover on its own because of the rain and drainage in this county. Wheat varies year to year on how many farmers will grow wheat because of the climate. We're not sure. Some years it's okay to grow, and some years they realize they didn't have a great crop yield, so they choose not to grow it the next year. And there have been some fruit orchards established throughout the county. Then when it comes to the soil types in Licking County, there are a large number of soil types, making it rough to tell what will grow better in what spots of your field, because you can have multiple different soil types within one field. In the southwest part of the county, the soil forms are very complicated because of the pattern types there are. In the southwest part, there we see a lot more of the different types of soil formations in one area. The soils are typically high in humus and moderately high in lime content. And the eastern part soils are derived mainly from weathered sandstone and shale, which then in turn makes the soil more naturally acidic, where we have to add bases to breathe down that acid level of the soil so our crops can grow productively in those fields. The surface soils in Licking County range from a loamy sand to a moderately heavy silt loam, but most of the soil is classified as a silt clay loam. The fertility productivity of the soils in this county are a medium, so we are not on the low end of that spectrum, but we are not on the high end. So we're still going to have a great crop yield from our fields. We are just not going to have the best crop yield we could. Almost all hay, oats, and corn produced in these fields are fed to our livestock within that county, or they are shipped to local states or other counties within Ohio and fed to their livestock. Looking at our budget, as Carly had said before, we do plan to buy 225 head of cattle in the spring and 100 head of cattle in the fall. We plan on purchasing those cattle for 65 cents to 80 cents per pound. We plan on selling those cattle weighing about 900 to 1,000 pounds, and we plan on selling them for $1.13 to $1.28 per pound. We also plan to market all of our cattle as choice fed, and we plan on making around a profit of 23 cents to 48 cents per pound. Breaking down our budget just a little bit more, the cost of our animals are going to be about $84,000 to $130,000. Once we sell them for the said around the prices we said on the last slide, it's going to be about $330,000 to $416,000. And that kind of leaves us with a total overall profit of $245,000 to $286,000. Taking those profits as a guidelines for our salary and other expenses, it leaves us with a $37,000 salary. And it also leaves us with $48,000 to put in our maintenance, vet bills, and others. We know our vet bills will not be $40,000 in a year, and we know our maintenance might not be $48,000. We're allocating that money into those areas just to have it in case, and if we don't use it, it will be a fallback for our future years, so we have it just in case it is needed.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the nutrition of our stocker calves. So, according to the NRC requirements of beef cattle, we're going to estimate that they finish about 1,200 pounds in the feedlot. So they need to be eating 18 pounds a day in dry matter. The grasses, they're grazing, and grass is really high in moisture, so they're going to need to eat more than 18 pounds of grass a day. And as they're growing, their protein requirements go down and their overall requirements go down. So at the highest crude protein requirement, it's going to be 13%. They need to gain about 3 pounds a day to get to that 900 to 1,000 pound range. And each group we're going to have for about 183 days. They do need that calcium and phosphorus ratio of about 2 to 1. So their calcium requirement is 0.49% of dry matter and phosphorus 2.24 of their dry matter. Our pasture mix. The pasture mix is very important. You want to put 2 to 6 species in that because it's ideal. This will increase our yield. They will have a better diet composition. This reduces the consequences of bad weather and other production risks because there's so many species. And this will make it so it kind of peaks all year round. Like there's no time where our pastures look like awful and then times where it looks great. It's going to look good all year round. So what we chose for our pasture mix is going to be 40% endophyte free tall fescue. And there is a typo. We're actually going to use Kentucky 32 for that. The other ones are going to be 35% orchard grass, 10% perennial ryegrass, 10% white clover, and 5% alfalfa. So tall fescue is a cool season grass. It does moderately tolerate acidic soil and poor drainage, which is good because we've established that Licking County has poor drainage issues. At its early vegetative state is when it's the most nutritious, and at that stage it has about 22.1% crude protein, which exceeds those requirements in the last slide and 2 slides before that. It's 73% TDN, energy content of 1.73 megacalories per kilogram, 0.51% calcium, and 0.37% phosphorus, which is just about that ratio that we want, a little high in phosphorus, but we'll make up for it in other ways. It's going to be 35% orchard grass, which is another cool season grass because it doesn't get super, super hot in the summer, so we stuck with cool season grasses. It's very vigorous, so it will tolerate a lot. It does withstand in acidic soil and in most soil types. It's very palatable, 74% TDN, 18.4% crude protein at that early vegetative stage at which orchard grass is also the most nutritious, 1.64 megacalories per kilogram in energy, 0.58% calcium, and 0.54% phosphorus. Still a little high in phosphorus, but we're okay. And then we want to do perennial ryegrass. It's another cool season grass, and we need to get endophyte free, just like the tall fescue, because this is another one that can become infected with endophytes. And we got to watch for ergot, which is a fungal disease that they can get, but that's why it's at a low percentage. We chose this one because it is very vigorous and it tolerates acidic soil. It's highly palatable and it will stand where others won't during flooding. This one might not be super drought tolerant, but because it's so hilly and there's poor drainage, there's going to be flooding in some areas, and this will stand there. 80% TDN, 19% crude protein, and 0.4% phosphorus. So we're good there. And then we want to add white clover. This is a legume, and we need some legumes in that mix to help fix nitrogen from the air. So we don't have to apply as much when we're like every year or every 5 years when we reseed. Legumes are also very high in protein, which is something that they're going to need a lot of. On the low side, it is 20% crude protein, and it is high in calcium, phosphorus, and magnesium, which is great. We're going to put some alfalfa in there because it's high quality, it's highly palatable, and it is another legume, so it will fix nitrogen and put more into that soil so we don't have to do as much. It ranges from 16 to 20% crude protein, but with this one we need to watch for bloat. That's why we only did 5% in our pasture mix, because it's so rich, it'll pass through our digestive systems like that, and we don't want them to bloat. So our nutrition plan for April through December, this is going to be when we're grazing. We're going to rotational graze and move them every 3 weeks. And our pasture mix is going to meet and exceed all the nutrient requirements at a low cost, and it will stand during the whole year, except when it's covered in snow. And we're going to feed free choice minerals at all times. And then our plan for the winter months, which we're going to do late December, early January through March, we're going to stockpile and graze tall fescue, and we're going to supplement with orchard grass and alfalfa hay just in case, because we know the ground will get covered in snow and something will happen, just so we have a backup. And we do have that 50 acres for hay production. And in the winter, there's still going to be free choice minerals. So I didn't know a lot about stockpiling tall fescue before this, but it was pretty interesting. So why do we stockpile tall fescue? It will retain more forage quality than other forages because the leaves have this waxy layer on them, so that actually helps keep in a lot of nutrients. And even during the winter, it will retain a crude protein content of about 14.6%. And the digestibility declines slower than other forages do in the winter. There is a higher crude protein and TDN when you stockpile tall fescue compared to feeding just hay. So how we do this is in August, we're going to cut for the last time our field, or we're going to stop grazing it at about 3 to 4 inches. Then we're going to apply nitrogen, which is the most successful at 40 to 80 pounds per acre. And then we're going to leave it alone and take all the cattle out of there until late December, early January for them to start grazing it.
All right, so now we're going to talk about vitamins and minerals. So we are actually going to have 2 separate mixes of minerals, one for when we're receiving these calves in when they're at their most stressed point, and one for when we're growing these cattle. The reason we're going to have 2 different mixes is the fact that these calves, when they're stressed, they need different requirements than what cattle do when they're growing. So I'm just going to read off the percentages that we're going to have in our mixes. They'll have to be custom mixed because I have not been able to find anybody that actually mixes these in Ohio. They mix a lot of these out west, but in our stress calf diet, we're going to have between 0.6 and 0.8% calcium. Magnesium is going to be 0.2 to 0.3%. Phosphorus is going to be 0.4 to 0.5%. Potassium is going to be 1.2 to 1.4%. Sodium is going to be 0.2 to 0.3. Cobalt part per million is going to be about 0.2. Copper part per million is going to be between 15 and 20. Iodine part per million is going to be between 0.3 and 0.6. Iron part per million is going to be 50. Selenium part per million is going to be 0.3 to 0.6. And zinc is going to be part per million 30. Our growing mineral mix is going to be calcium at 0.31%, magnesium at 0.1%, phosphorus at 0.2%, potassium at 0.6%, sodium between 0.06 and 0.08, cobalt 0.1 part per million, copper 10 parts per million, iodine 0.5 parts per million, iron is going to be between 100 and 200 parts per million, selenium is going to be 0.1 part per million, and zinc is going to be 75 to 100 parts per million. The reason that we're going to have the different diet or the different mineral mixes are when we receive these cattle in, they're going to be very stressed and they're going to be more they're going to catch diseases easier like BRD, and then the big four that Carly was talking about vaccinating for. So hopefully with this mineral mix, these calves will be able to get back on feed and water quicker. We need these cattle on feed every day if we're needing to gain 3 pounds per day. At 183 days, that's when we'd be able to finish these cattle. And honestly, I'd like to see it at the 160-day mark to give us a 2-week turnaround time on both these loads of cattle. There's going to be different ways to feed the mineral. We're going to opt for a loose mineral instead of a block because it's just easier to have these mixes done in a loose mineral. Another thing is that we'll need to make sure our sodium is in that range, because if not, these cattle won't eat it because they just really crave that salt. As to how we're getting the minerals in them is through the salt. And if your mineral mix does not have enough salt in it, don't just throw out a block of white salt because your mineral intake is going to go down and they're just going to lick that salt. Another important thing that we're going to need to pay attention to is how much minerals in there. We're going to need to be checking that about every 2 to 3 days. We don't want these animals running out of mineral because if they were, the second that we put more back in them with that salt that's in there, they're just going to go gorge themselves and they're going to get an over mineral take. So it's very important that we make sure that we don't run out of mineral. Other than that, we'll feed it until these cattle seem to get back on feed and water. I'd like to say that'd be 2 to 3 weeks. The bulls might be a little bit longer since we are going to be cutting them later, as Carly said. We'll move on to the yearly plan. So in our first year, after our first year operation, we're planning to switch over to automatic waterers to be able to increase the number of waters. So that way, say the boss cow's at the water trough on the one side, pushes everybody out, and then the little calf in the back ain't getting much. And then the boss cow moves to go on to eat, and everybody else follows. That calf isn't going to stay there by itself. So the hope would be to be able to put automatic waters throughout the pasture field, so that way these calves can drink whenever they want and they can get their fill. Putting out automatic waters anywhere throughout the pasture shouldn't be that big of a problem. Licking County does flood, as it's been stated, and there's also a pretty good water table underneath. So it should not be very hard to be able to have automatic waters. Another thing that we'd need to do would be to adjust our budget as necessary. We will need to adjust, depending on how much nitrogen we actually need to apply on these fields for the tall fescue before we turn cattle back out the winter to graze or to harvest. We will also need to look. Our vet bills right now has got $48,000 in it. I'm hoping we're nowhere near $48,000 for vet bills, because if so, we're doing something wrong. But yeah, other than that, we need to just look at our expenses and move money around in the budgets as necessary. Moving on to our 5-year plan, we're planning to switch over our fencing to high tensile. It is a little bit more costly, but being able to mend that fence and fix it is going to just be a lot easier than a board fence. It'll just be easier to replace. We won't have calves getting out, running around all over the place. Then we're going to look into hedging, which, if you guys don't know what hedging is that is getting these cattle in and then having somebody, a buyer per se, a feedlot, at the end of when we have these cattle backgrounded, to get them to commit on a price when we first get these calves in, to say, yeah, this is the price we're going to pay. So say the market were to go down, we are locked in on that price. The only downside to this is if the market does happen to go up, we are stuck at that lower price. But if we're gaining that 23 to 48 cents a pound per head, we will have no problems. There's no problems making that kind of money right there, especially if the market gets flooded and then ends up tanking. We're still locked in on them prices. So that would be a very huge advantage. Another thing that we're going to look into is running more cattle and expanding out the farm. If we can get up to 350 head in the spring and summer months and then run right around 200 head throughout the winter, we'd be sitting pretty good with that 23 to 38 cents per pound move. That's just going to jump our profits up almost double what we have right now, which would be very, very good. Another thing we'll be thinking about getting into is corn silage. The winters in Licking County are wet. Fields are going to get turned into mud. So we're just going to have to start thinking about something else other than our stockpiled forages to be feeding these cattle to get us through until spring. And then the last thing we're going to look at 5 years is reseeding the pastures and hayfield. That just leans more in towards what I was just talking about. These pasture fields, they're going to get run on, nonstop by these calves. So we're going to need to look into reseeding the pastures. They're going to turn to mud. It's just how it is in Licking County. It's always wet. That's how it is throughout all of Ohio. And our pasture fields are what is mainly putting the weight on the cattle for a relatively cheaper cost. And to keep these cattle at 3 pounds a day, we need to have our pastures performing at all times. Our 10-year plan, we're going to, again, end up reseeding fields. It's probably going to be closer to a 3 to 4 year thing. We'll be having to reseed pasture fields. And our hay fields, we can probably sneak out about 5 years. That should be all right. But our pastures are probably every 3 to 4 going to end up needing reseeded with just how wet it gets around there. The other thing we'll be looking into is expanding into row crops to introduce a grain into a diet. With the corn silage, going back to that, we can look at moving into a total mixed ration to being able to supplement these cattle year round per se, and just bump up that average daily gain to hopefully be able to get these cattle in and out in 160 days and just leave us an extra 23 days to get ready and prepare for the next group. The next thing we're going to need to look into doing is a cheaper way of production. That just expands our profit margin. Everybody's always trying to find a cheaper way to do it. Moving into that total mixed ration would probably help being able to put pounds on cattle. Another thing that we've talked about doing for the heifers is using MGM. Just hoping to keep them on par with what the steers are gaining. And then the last thing that we're going to look into is examining and changing our mineral mix if needed. The soil changes over time. cattle's needs may change over time. There's still research being done all the time on minerals. You never really know what could need done to these cattle or to the mineral mix to keep them performing at the top of their game and keeping them healthy and gaining weight and just producing for us.
Okay, and then we have our sources. This is what we use for the nutrition section, the sources that were used to find out information about Licking County and where our farm's going to be, and then for the mineral mix and information. And that is it.